Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. We've got something seriously hardcore to unpack today, this DC training PDF.
Yeah, dog crap, intense stuff.
Really is. So, for this deep dive, we're going to get to the heart of this whole bodybuilding philosophy. Help you understand how they approach building muscle and strength. We're going to look at how they think about training, which exercises they like, how they structure workouts, and even some of their thoughts on diet and stretching. So, let's jump right in.
Sounds good. I think one of the most striking things right off the bat when you look at this PDF is this central idea they have that big strength gains over time are the primary driver for putting on noticeable muscle. So it's not just about getting a pump, it's about being able to really move some weight.
Okay, so this strength gains drive muscle growth idea. The source uses a really interesting analogy here. They say, okay, imagine someone already benching like a respectable 375 pounds. Bumping that up to 400, that might not lead to a ton of muscle growth, right? But if you take someone who's struggling with 150 on the bench and they work their way up to 400, now that's a huge strength increase. And according to the PDF, that could mean like 2.5 inches of chest thickness.
Wow, that's big.
Yeah, that's a real measurable difference, driven by getting a lot stronger.
And this really flies in the face of a lot of what you see out there, right? This idea of just chasing the pump in the gym.
Yeah.
The author's pretty clear that that's not going to get most people very far in the long run. I mean, they even use the example of doing endless calf raises without ever upping the weight, where your calf's actually going to grow. The point is, without consistently challenging the muscle with heavier and heavier weights, your body just doesn't have a good reason to adapt and get bigger.
So it's more aligned with a powerlifting or power building kind of mindset.
Right, you're always striving to lift heavier on those key lifts, and the muscle growth kind of comes along for the ride as your body adapts to that increased load. Exactly. And the PDF puts it really bluntly. The people who make the greatest strength gains over time will make the greatest size gains over time according to their genetic potential. That's the whole foundation of their approach.
So let's dig into this progressive overload concept. The PDF emphasizes that your muscles grow to protect themselves from heavier and heavier demands. It's about adaptation.
Yeah, and what's interesting here is how the author frames the different training variables. You've got
Right.
training volume, right? How much you're doing, intensity, how hard you're pushing, using techniques like supersets and all that. But the potential to just keep adding weight to the bar, that's presented as basically limitless. You can only do so many sets and reps. You can only push yourself so close to failure. But in theory, you could always try to add a little more weight.
And the author doesn't hold back on their opinion about lightweight training for size. They even kind of take a jab at some folks in the fitness media.
Oh, yeah, there's that great line about not listening to some buck 58-pound writer from FLEX magazine if you want to build serious muscle. That's pretty funny.
To illustrate this point, they bring up examples of some of the, biggest bodybuilders out there and point out that they were also known for being insanely strong. Guys like Kovacs, Prince, Coleman, Yates, Francois, even Nasser in his earlier days.
Of course, it's important to remember that, especially at the pro level, performance-enhancing drugs are likely a big factor. However, the PDF uses these examples to show that, there's a correlation. Many of the guys who built those absolute freakish physiques were also incredibly strong.
Right.
Ronnie Coleman's a perfect example. He had a powerlifting background, famous for hitting those crazy deadlifts over 800 pounds.
Yeah, that's insane.
And what's interesting is the source even mentions that he won the Natural Team Universe early in his career, showing he had that strength foundation even before potential drug use. And he kept training heavy throughout his whole career.
It's interesting that they contrast Flex Wheeler, known for a lighter, more aesthetic style of training, with Chris Cormier, who was all about heavyweights. The PDF points out that Cormier often outweighed Wheeler on stage, sometimes significantly. Even with great genetics, focusing on heavy lifting seems to have made a real difference in terms of overall mass.
And I think this ties into something you might see in any gym. Guys using steroids who aren't necessarily that big. The PDF argues that this often comes down to not focusing on progressive overload with heavy weights.
Right.
Sure, the drugs help with recovery and protein synthesis, but they don't replace the need to actually challenge your muscles with increasing resistance.
It's interesting how they tie those periods of really rapid muscle growth, especially for beginners, to periods of fast strength gains. When you first start lifting, you see quick progress in both how much you can lift and how your muscles look.
Absolutely. And the PDF suggests that even with the bigger size increases you see with steroid use, a key factor is that ability to train with much heavier weights, often more frequently because of the enhanced recovery.
So that brings us to this concept of power building, which the PDF seems to really be advocating for.
Yeah, they describe it as prioritizing the techniques and exercises that lead to the fastest strength gains and ultimately more muscle.
They use this hypothetical example of twins. Same diet, same supplements, but one trains with a more traditional bodybuilding approach focused on the pump, while the other follows a power building style, always trying to increase their strength on those big lifts.
Right.
And the PDF pretty strongly suggests that the power building twin would end up with significantly more muscle after a year.
Yeah, it makes you think about how powerlifters, even when they're not in a super lean condition, often have impressive muscle thickness. That underlying strength seems to build a really dense foundation.
Now, when the PDF talks about heavy lifting, it's important to clarify that it's not just about going for a 1 rep max all the time. It's about using the heaviest weight you can for a given rep range with good form.
Right, like that example they give about doing hack squats for 20 reps with a really challenging weight. It's about pushing your limits within that rep range.
And they explicitly link being able to squat a heavy weight, like 400 pounds, for 20 reps with well-developed legs.
Which leads to that whole discussion about the limitations of staying with the same weights, even if you're changing exercises all the time.
Right. They use that analogy of being stuck on a desert island with only 135 pounds to train with.
Yeah, you can get creative with the exercises, but eventually your strength gains and therefore your muscle growth are going to hit a ceiling. Doesn't matter how many different ways you use that 135 pounds.
You can do all the fancy supersets and drop sets you want, but you're ultimately limited by the resistance. The PDF really shuts down that idea that constantly changing exercises is the key to progress if you're not also trying to lift heavier.
Exactly. And they bring back that twin example. One twin keeps trying to add weight to their 20-rep squat. The other one's always changing leg exercises, but using the same weight. It's pretty clear which twin's going to develop those impressive legs. It's the one focused on getting stronger.
So the takeaway is stick with exercises and training methods as long as you're seeing progress in your strength. If you can lift more weight or do more reps over time, there's no need to change things up. Push an exercise to its limit before you even think about switching.
And they even encourage you to kind of observe people at the gym. Look for the guys who are using the same weights week after week, month after month. The idea being that their lack of progress probably comes down to not pushing themselves to get stronger.
And that's where those humble 2.5-pound plates come in. Those small, consistent increases over time. Those are your best friends, as the PDF says.
They even use the example of, like male strippers. Some might be on steroids, but they don't achieve that massive muscularity because they're not focused on heavy lifting and eating enough protein.
Yeah.
So even with the drugs, it's not a magic solution. You still need the right training principles.
Okay, let's talk about how the actual DC training method works. They really emphasize training frequency, hitting each muscle group more often than most people do, typically twice within an 8-day cycle, but with surprisingly low volume per session.
Right. What's really interesting is the logic behind that.
Yeah.
They argue that high volume training can actually hinder recovery, which then limits how often you can hit a muscle group hard. The author actually claims that, you could potentially gain a lot more muscle over a few years by doing less volume more often than with the traditional high volume stuff.
So how are the workouts structured?
So for each body part, you pick like 3 key exercises. In each workout, you only do one of those exercises and you push it to its absolute limit before rotating to the next one in the next workout for that muscle group.
And this is where the rest pause technique comes in, which they highlight as a super effective way to drive strength gains.
Yeah, they give a great example with incline Smith press. So after you warm up, you do one all-out set to failure. Then a very short rest, like 15 deep breaths, and another set to failure with the same weight. You repeat that for a total of 3 mini sets. Often they suggest finishing with a static hold at the end.
And they're really specific about the quality of each rep, even when you're failing. Finishing each rep with a slow, controlled negative, and often an assisted positive.
Right. This ties into the whole principle of controlled positives and negatives for all exercises. Explosive on the way up, slow and controlled on the way down. They even suggest that the main reason for lifting heavy is so you can control that heavy negative and really maximize muscle damage.
Another key part of DC training is extreme stretching. They really emphasize that this is crucial for fascia, for recovery, and ultimately for seeing big changes in your physique.
Yeah, and this isn't just your typical quick stretch after a set. They're talking about intense, sometimes excruciating stretches held for extended periods, sometimes with weight added. They believe this is a key part of unlocking more muscle growth.
So for the workout split, a typical example they give is a rotation of Monday, Wednesday, Friday, back to Monday, hitting each muscle group twice every 8 days. But they acknowledge that recovery needs vary, and some people might need more rest between workouts.
Yeah, and they mentioned things like glutamine peptides and, of course, the extreme stretching as ways to aid recovery.
Okay, let's look at a couple of sample workouts. Workout 1, for example, they have incline Smith press with rest pause and a static hold for chest. Front Smith press with rest pause and static hold for shoulders, reverse grip bench press with rest pause for triceps, rear rack chins with rest pause and static hold for back width, and then floor deadlifts for back thickness. Those are done with straight sets.
And then workout 2 has preacher curls with rest pause and static hold for biceps, hammer curls as a straight set for forearms, hack squats for calves with a controlled negative and a stretch at the bottom of each rep, Cybex hamstring press with rest pause, and hack squats for quads. Often a brutal straight set or a heavy set followed by a higher rep set.
It's worth emphasizing that you're only doing one working set per exercise, whether it's a straight set to failure or a rest pause set, and that comes after all your warm-up sets. They suggest a progression, starting with straight sets, then adding a static hold, and eventually moving to rest pause with static holds as you recover better.
And as you get stronger, lifting heavier and heavier weights, the PDF really stresses giving yourself enough rest and recovery. Someone squatting 500 pounds needs a lot more recovery time than someone squatting 155, even if they're both doing the same number of reps. It's about finding that balance between training frequency and making sure you're fully recovered.
Makes sense.
The PDF also touches on the author's own journey with training, how their philosophy evolved over like 15 years, moving towards lower volume and higher intensity on that one work set. They see overtraining as a major obstacle and really emphasize understanding your body's recovery ability and finding the minimum effective dose of intense training.
So they have these comprehensive lists of example exercises for each muscle group, giving you a good range of options within this framework.
Right. And they even have this specific method for calf training called DC calf style training. It involves a controlled negative on the calf raise, a long 15-second stretch at the bottom, and then an explosive positive, all for one set of 12 reps. The key is to try and add weight each workout, and that long stretch seems to reduce soreness compared to other methods.
Interesting. Now, what about people who struggle to build their chest?
For that, the PDF suggests doing 2 working sets. So you do one rest pause exercise in the 11 to 15 rep range, followed by a straight set of 20 to 30 reps on a chosen key exercise. Initially, they recommend flat dumbbell press. The focus here is on a deep stretch at the bottom and strict form.
Okay.
The rest pause chest exercise would rotate each workout, but you consistently try to improve your reps or weight on that key exercise over time. They mentioned that you might have to reduce training frequency for other body parts while you focus on a lagging area like this. And they also point out that a weak chest isn't always just about having too much body fat.
Right.
They really discourage people from searching for some magical isolation exercise and stress the importance of heavy compounds like dips, close grip bench, reverse grip bench, hitting those with challenging weights and reps.
The PDF briefly mentions diet, mostly saying that specific recommendations are tailored to each person. But they do mention using olive oil as a way to break through plateaus for people who have trouble eating enough, adding a lot of calories to protein and fat-rich meals.
Yeah. And then there's that detailed stretching protocol, which lays out exactly how to do each extreme stretch for each muscle group, often involving weights or using your body weight to get a really deep stretch, holding it for like 60 seconds. Intense. It's supposed to be pretty tense, yeah. And for calves, they emphasize that inset stretching technique. 5-second negative on the calf raise, followed by a 15-second stretch at the bottom of each rep.
Okay, so finally, they give us these recommended rep ranges for each muscle group, breaking down which exercises are usually done with rest pause and which with straight sets. So for shoulders and triceps, it's often 12 to 20 reps with rest pause, aiming for around 15 on average for shoulders. For back width, maybe a bit more, like 15 to 20. Back thickness, so rack deadlifts or bent over rows, those might be in the 12 to 15 rep range with rest pause, while floor deadlifts are usually a straight set of 12 to 20 heavy reps. Biceps are interesting. They often have a higher target with rest pause, like 15 to 20 per mini set, aiming for around 25 total. Forearms and brachialis reps vary depending on the movement. Calves, that's a straight set of 15 to 20 with that 15-second stretch on each rep. Hamstrings are in the 15 to 20 range with rest pause. And then quads are often a super intense straight set of 15 to 50 heavy reps. Sometimes they suggest doing a heavy set of 6 to 8, followed by another heavy set of around 20.
Yeah.
And of course, the overall principle is to try and add weight or reps in every single workout.
So to wrap it up, this DC training PDF is all about strength. They believe that making consistent strength gains on those big basic exercises through heavy lifting is the most important thing for building muscle. They advocate for lower volume, higher frequency training, using techniques like rest pause, and really hammering home that progressive overload is the key to long-term growth.
It's a very specific and definitely hardcore approach to training. We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the core principles behind DC training and how it aims to maximize both muscle and strength.
And now that we've explored this, think about how this idea of consistently increasing the load might apply to other areas of your life. Not just in the gym, whether it's the demands you put on yourself at work, in your relationships, or anywhere else where you're trying to grow and improve.
That's a great point. And also, take a look at your own training. Are you really prioritizing progressive strength gains on those key lifts?
Good questions to ask yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into DC training. Keep exploring these concepts and thinking about how they fit into your own training. Until next time,